Help! My piano student just lost her music and she's supposed to play in the recital this weekend. The orchestra director just handed me this completely illegible first oboe part, and the first rehearsal is tonight. The band director wants me to cover the bass trumpet part on my transposing instrument, and the first rehearsal's in 30 minutes. Okay, calm down. Breathe. I got you. In this video, I'm going to walk you through my way of working in the free open source software MuseScore, and this method is adapted from my workflow in Finale, minus some of the fancier publishing steps. There are some great tutorials out there that are very thorough and very high quality, and they show you all the different things you can do in MuseScore, but you don't have time or interest right now to watch through hours of videos. You just need to get this done as soon as possible. First things first, while my title card rolls, make sure you have the latest version. Head on over to musescore.org, hit download, and let's get started. Seriously, even if you're only one version out of date, update it right now. I'm not kidding. It's free, and version 3.6 is so much better than 3.5. If you're watching this in the far future and they're on version 27.0 or whatever, I'll include a link here to an updated video if something's changed substantially. Okay, very first thing, before even opening the program, if you have a MIDI keyboard, right now is the time to plug it in. If you don't have one, no big deal. Don't worry about it. Let's start MuseScore, and we'll breeze through the setup process because it's pretty self-explanatory. Hit Create New Score. Enter pertinent details. If you need a really standard ensemble like SATB Choir or String Quartet or something, you can choose it here. Otherwise, just hit Next, and you'll end up on the Choose Instruments screen. Use the search bar, it'll make your life easier. Next, key signature. I just want to point out here the distinction between C major and the keyless key signature. If you're writing for a transposing instrument, this one will change depending on the key of the instrument. This one will not. Is the piece truly in C major or A minor, or did the composer decide not to include a key signature at all? Choose wisely. Finally, you can enter all of this stuff. Ignore number of measures unless you literally happen to know the exact number of measures off the top of your head. Don't bother counting them. Now we can click Finish and we'll be on the main interface. Okay, for navigation, you can click and drag the score to move around. Pretty simple. I like to use the scroll wheel on my mouse. If you hold Shift, you can scroll left and right. To zoom in and out, press Control =, and Control -. Again, I like to use the scroll wheel on my mouse, so you can just hold Control and scroll up and down. If you use a laptop touchpad, all of the usual two-finger navigation shortcuts should work. We're on page view by default, but I'm going to switch to continuous view just because I like it better for the first few steps. Take your pick, go with your heart. Before we get going, I want to draw your attention to this concert pitch button at the top. Whether you need concert pitch or transposing pitch will be entirely dependent on your situation. If you're copying from a transposed part, like a trumpet part or a clarinet, copy it directly in the key it's written in. Don't try to transpose it in your head. No matter how good you are at mentally transposing intervals, you might make a mistake, but the computer most certainly won't. Part 1. Basic note input. First things first. Don't you dare click every single note into the program individually. It'll take forever, and it's just an extremely frustrating way of working. We're going to learn the basic keyboard shortcuts, because the less you have to use your mouse, the less painful this process is, I promise. Press N for note to toggle note input mode. You should see this nice blue box appear on the first measure of your score, which I'm going to call the caret. This is very important. There's loads of ways to exit note input mode, and if you're trying to input notes outside of note input mode, MuseScore can do some funny things. So if at any point you don't see this caret, you are not in note input mode. Caret, note input mode. No caret, not note input mode. MuseScore uses a method called step time input, also known as the way more descriptive duration before pitch input. It's exactly what it sounds like. For my method, your right hand is mostly going to be responsible for durations, and your left hand mostly for pitches, and also pressing Ctrl-Z to undo things. Trust me, you're going to be undoing a lot of mistakes. Now, if you've ever wondered what the point of having a numpad is, here is the only correct answer. It's for selecting note durations. If you bought a shiny new MacBook Pro and it doesn't have a numpad, well, that's unfortunate. You can use the number row and it'll work just the same. The numbers 1 through 9 represent durations. 5 in the very middle being a quarter note. Higher numbers are longer durations, so 6 is half notes, 7 is whole notes, etc. Conversely, lower numbers are shorter, so 4 is eighth notes, 3 is sixteenths. For a dotted note, hit the period key, a dot. So far so good. Now we select a pitch. If you have a MIDI piano, great. But honestly, it's pretty straightforward on a QWERTY keyboard. C makes a C. D makes a D. E makes an E. I've gotten so used to this that I can play scales on my computer keyboard better than I can on a piano. MuseScore will always go with whatever's in the key signature, so if we have an F sharp in the key signature, pressing F will make an F sharp. Also, the 0 key, which didn't get assigned its own duration, is actually the most important number key because 0 creates a rest. Notice how the caret moves forward, but the note we just entered is still highlighted blue. That's because MuseScore is waiting for us to either modify the note we just entered or enter a new note. I just showed you how to enter new notes, so let's focus on modifying the previous one. To shift a note by an octave, hold Control and press the up or down arrow keys. Did you notice how when you press a letter key, MuseScore will just pick the nearest corresponding note, that is the one with the smallest leap? That means that you will need to use this shortcut, Control, up or down, if you need a skip of a fifth or larger. To create a sharp or a flat, you can shift the note up or down in semitones with just the up or down arrow keys. MuseScore does its best to guess which accidentals make sense in the key, so since we're in G major, it helpfully skips B sharp and C flat. Occasionally, you might need to respell a note enharmonically. This will especially be a problem if you're using a MIDI keyboard because MIDI data doesn't differentiate between enharmonic notes like G sharp and A flat, and sometimes there's a case to be made for either of them. The button to change a note enharmonically is J. For jazz, I guess. I don't know. I don't make these keyboard shortcuts. If you're working with instruments that can play more than one note at a time, you might want to stack intervals on top of your note to make a chord. Hold down Alt, and then select the interval you want with the number keys. So to create a diatonic third above, use Alt 3. To make an octave above, Alt 8. Just like with a single note, I can now modify the accidental of the new note with the up and down arrow keys. Another thing you might want to do to modify the previous note is lengthen it using a tie. First, pick the duration you want to tie to, and then you hit the plus key. You can even use plus to lengthen a whole chord. See how the numpad's pretty useful? If you don't have a numpad, then you'll have to input the plus the same way you would when typing in a word processor. So Shift equals. Next, we're going to return to the number keys yet again to talk about triplets. Now, triplet input is a little bit weird. You basically want to pick the duration that represents the full length of your triplet and then press Control 3. So, I want 3 eighth note triplets, which add up to 1 quarter note. So first I would select the quarter note duration using the number 5, and then I'd press Control 3 to divide it into eighth note triplets. Similarly, if I wanted quarter note triplets, I would first press 6 for a half note, and then Control 3 to divide the half note into 3 quarter note triplets. Make sense? Let's go one step further. Each number key corresponds to a tuplet from 2 to 9. So 5 eighth note quintuplets equals 1 half note, right? So first I would press 6 for a half note, and then Control 5 to divide it into 5 eighth note quintuplets. Okay, just to recap, the numbers on your keyboard have 3 purposes. On their own, they correspond to rhythmic values. With Control pressed down, they create tuplets. And with Alt pressed down, they add intervals on top of the note you just entered. One last quick thing about voices. If you need to enter 2 voices with different rhythms on the same staff, that's what these little buttons are for. When you're typing in voice 2, the caret will turn green instead, and the last entered note will be highlighted green. Voice 1 will automatically go stems up, and voice 2 will default to stems down. You might want to hide some of the rests in the second voice, especially if you're writing for piano where this kind of thing is pretty common. I'm going to hide these rests using the shortcut V for visible, and the rest will turn translucent like this. When you go to print or export the document, it'll be completely gone, like this. Okay, let's take a breather. That was a lot of information. Music is complicated, and notes tend to have a lot of properties. I promise you that time invested in learning these basic keyboard shortcuts will really go a long way. Each time that you make a mistake, press undo, and redo it, you're building those connections in your brain, so you're going to gain some ease and fluency with it. Take a moment to try it for yourself. Or don't, because we only have 20 minutes left until rehearsal. Let's get going. Part 1.5, palettes. First of all, you're not basic, you're advanced. So go over to the right here and select the advanced workspace, and that'll give us access to things like tremolos and fingerings. The way MuseScore is set up, these palettes on the left side of the screen contain a lot of the useful things you might want to use in your score. For the first pass, we want to focus on inputting just the notes and rhythms, as well as any major structural elements. So key signatures, time signatures, tempo markings, rehearsal marks, special bar lines, like double bar lines and repeats, and things like accelerando and retardando. Basically, anything that a musician in a rehearsal or a lesson might use as a reference point. So like, let's go from rehearsal letter B, or let's start at the allegro. For the time being, ignore almost everything else. Fancy stuff like articulations and slurs, that's for our second and third passes. For now, we're going to keep it simple. I'm just going to input the first couple of measures right now. And what do you know? This musical example that I definitely didn't just make up conveniently changes key, tempo, and time signature. So I'm going to demonstrate a whole bunch of different palettes. I'm going to click on the measure that I want to change. Notice the caret is gone, so we have exited note input mode. This means we can now click on things without inputting new notes over top of them. I can now select whatever new element that I want. I'm going to add a new clef and a new key signature. When we change time signature, the selection box disappears because MuseScore has to reflow everything that comes after it. Next, we're going to add a double bar line. Select the preceding bar by clicking on the staff and choose the double bar line from the palettes, which will go at the end of the selected bar. Now, tempos and rehearsal marks work more or less the same. They're attached to a specific note, so if the measure already has notes in it, make sure to just select the very first thing in the bar. Then we'll pick one of these 80 BPM tempos, and we'll double click on the new tempo marking in the score to change it. Unless your piece is actually 80 BPM, in which case I guess you don't have to change it. You can add a descriptive word at the start of the tempo marking if you so choose. Rehearsal marks can also be changed by double-clicking, and MuseScore will do its best to guess what the next one is supposed to be. Before we do the actual first pass, I want to show you a few tricks that'll speed up the process. Notice that these shortcuts that I'm going to show you map onto similar shortcuts in word processing applications like Google Docs or Microsoft Word. So of course you can navigate from note to note by using the left and right arrow keys. But if you hold the Control key, you'll now be navigating from measure to measure. This will work in and out of note input mode. Shift is useful when selecting things. So for this, we're going to make sure we're not in note input mode. Click on the first note of a passage, hold Shift, and then click on the last note of the passage, and that'll create a selection box around it. Alternatively, you can also hold Shift and then press the left or right arrow keys to select a passage note by note. If you want to be a real pro, you can combine both. So hold Control, Shift, left and right, and that'll select a passage measure by measure. With these selection boxes, you can do the same cut, copy, and paste operations you'd use in a word processor. These can be really speedy tricks to input a repeated figure. One more thing. If you run out of measures, just press Control B to add another one. I know my piece is like 200-ish measures, so I'm just going to hold down Control B to create a whole ton of measures. We're going to delete all the leftovers later. All right, go forth and complete the first pass. You can pause the video here for a reminder of what you're inputting and what you're ignoring, and all the keyboard shortcuts that you need. See you on the other side. Part 2, Articulations and Slurs. Did you make it? Note input is the trickiest part. I promise it's smooth sailing from here on. Make sure you save a copy of your file. Next, we're going to put in articulations, slurs, and any other things that directly affect individual notes, like trills, tremolos, arpeggiations, glissandos, all that kind of stuff. We're done with note input mode, so make sure from here on that the caret is turned off. Let's go back to the beginning and select the first note to get started. Using the left and right arrow keys to move from note to note, select the note you want, and press one of these 4 shortcuts to produce an articulation. Shift S for staccato, Shift V for accent, Shift N for tenuto, and Shift O for marcato. You'll find ornaments, fingerings, and other less common articulations in the palettes. Fermatas are under articulations, even though they arguably aren't really articulations, but for our purposes they behave like one. Slurs are also pretty easy. To slur from one note to the next, select the first note, and hit S for slur. Alternatively, you can use our clever keyboard shortcuts. So hold Shift and use your mouse or the left and right arrow keys to select a larger passage, and then hit S to create the slur. Note that you can do this with articulations as well. So I've selected a passage using the Shift arrow keys shortcut, and I can press Shift S to add staccatos to each of them. If I want to add a fermata to 3 parts at the same time, I'll hold Shift and then press the down arrow to move the selection box onto other tracks, and then select the fermata from the articulations palette. Okay, let's do our second pass. Once again, you can pause the video here for reference. We want to go through the whole piece again and focus entirely on articulations and slurs. Continue to ignore dynamics, hairpins, and any special text like pizzicato, espressivo, dolce, stuff like that. Part 3, dynamics, techniques, and expressions. See, the second pass is easy. We've taken this project and we've compartmentalized it into smaller tasks so that there's a smaller chance we'll miss anything, and we're being systematic and efficient. You've got this.
Make sure you save your file.
Let's start with dynamics, which work essentially the same way articulations do. Select the note or notes that you want them on, and choose your dynamic from the palette. Hairpins work pretty much the same way slurs do. Select one or more notes, and then use the keyboard shortcut to create one. So in this case, the opening angle bracket is a crescendo, and the closed angle bracket is a decrescendo. That makes sense, right? Well, technically those are the comma and the period keys, respectively, so you'll just have to hold Shift, just like if you were typing angle brackets into a word processor. The other thing we want to deal with on this pass is the two distinct categories of playing instructions. There's expressive text, which goes under the staff in italics, and technical instructions, which go over the staff in Roman type. This is a super common mistake, so allow me to emphasize it with a quote from someone who definitely knows what they're talking about.
Roman and italic typefaces differentiate directives. Roman type is used for player allocation, instrument changes, and technical instructions, with bold Roman for tempi. Italic type is used for expression marks, with stylized bold italic for dynamics. The reader is accustomed to this text differentiation, and information can thus be assimilated more quickly.
MuseScore differentiates between these two things as staff text and expressions, respectively. To input staff text, so like arco, pizzicato, mute, or tutti, press Ctrl-T for text and type in whatever you want. For expressions, so like dolce or molto espressivo, press Ctrl-E. Got that? You're doing great. Let's do the third pass now, where we deal with inputting everything that's left. Dynamics, hairpins, staff text, and expressions. Plus, it couldn't hurt to keep an eye out for any mistakes you might have made so far. If you've made it this far, congrats! You now have all the details of your score, and you can do whatever you need with it.
This is another reminder to make sure you save your file.
Alright, so if your music has words in it, I definitely recommend making a dedicated pass now for just lyrics. Use Ctrl-L on a note to type in lyrics. Now we can perform whatever operations we need on the music. Do you need to transpose it to a different key? Use Tools, Transpose. Want to arrange it for a different instrument? Right-click on the staff, go to Staff/Part Properties, and hit Change Instrument. Alternatively, you can always open the Instruments dialog box from the beginning by pressing I. Here you can add new instruments or delete ones that you don't want anymore. Now we're going to talk about parts. So if you have more than one part, you might want individual parts rather than just the full score. You can export the parts individually by going to File, Parts, and then press the All Parts button. Now you can see these secondary tabs. If they're not already on by default, you'll definitely want to activate multi-measure rests. Just press M and any consecutive bars of rest should be consolidated with one of those H-bar style multi-measure rests. Another adjustment you might want to make, so if you entered anything into the copyright box way at the beginning, it's put this annoying little footer on every single page. Double click on it, and then in this dialog box, you change these values to $C. That indicates to MuseScore that you only want it to show up on the first page. Let's also run a couple of plugins to clean things up. If you have a bunch of extra measures at the end, then you can go to Tools and click on Remove Empty Trailing Measures. Next, with no notes selected, go to Tools and press Regroup Rhythms. It's not perfect, but if you have any rhythms that cross the middle of the beat in 4/4, you're supposed to split them up so that they're easier to parse when you're reading. That's what this tool is for. A lot of our piece here is in 6/8, compound time signature, so you want to make sure that the beat is clear, and this will usually take care of that. Another plugin I highly recommend is Add and Remove Courtesy Accidentals. It doesn't come with MuseScore, but it's free and it's super easy to configure, so I'm going to walk you through it. Follow the link in the description and it'll take you to this page. This nice German fellow named Jorn has done all the heavy lifting for us, so we can download his work by clicking on Code and Download Zip. Now extract the zip file and then copy these 4 files. In your Documents folder, go to the MuseScore folder, mine's called MuseScore 3, and then paste the files into the Plugins folder. Back in MuseScore, go to Plugins, and then Plugin Manager. Now click on Reload Plugins, and you should see the 3 plugins we just added. Tick the boxes on all 3 of them, click OK, and now we're ready to run it. Again, with nothing selected, so that the plugin applies to the whole document, click Plugins, Accidentals, Add Courtesy Accidentals. Amazing. Thank you, Jorn. Dankeschön. Okay, this score is looking pretty good. MuseScore tends to use pretty tight spacing, so if you find it a little bit too squished, you can select part or all of the music and just hit Shift and then the square brackets to space it out a little bit to taste. The software does a pretty good job of formatting our file automatically, but if your score is more than 2 pages, the musician will probably appreciate it if you've put a little thought into page turns. Find and click on something that you think would be a good place to turn the page, like this bunch of rests here. To force a line break, which is called a system break in MuseScore, you can hit Enter, just like in a word processor. Similarly, if you want to force a page break, just press Control-Enter, again, just like in a word processor. You didn't know you could do that, did you? You want to make sure all the pages look relatively balanced and you don't end up with a final page with only like 2 bars on it. This isn't rocket science. I'm going to add a line break here and a page break here and another line break here. Look at that. Much better.
Make sure you save your file.
Okay, how are we doing? Oh, rehearsal's in 5 minutes. Let's export this or print it. File, Export. Wow, look at all these things you can export it as. PDF, MP3, even as an OGG if you want to keep the whole open source thing going, I guess. File, Print. Thanks for watching. If this video helped you out of a jam, make sure you let me know. And if you want to see more of my work as a music copyist, you can check me out on Facebook, Instagram, and on my website. Happy muse scoring.